Rangers fans, welcome to Liberty Blue, the essential New York Rangers podcast. I'm Andrew Chelney. That's Nick Zararis. And Nick, the coaching staff next year might have Mike Sullivan at the top, followed by John Tortorella and David Quinn as the assistants. I'm kidding. But even the idea of that sends shivers down my spine.
It's kind of funny when you think about it that Team USA brought David Quinn, Mike Sullivan, and John Tortorella to a Four Nations face-off, and the Team Canada staff was like everybody who's won a cup in the last decade, and in comparison to Team USA. And look, I woke up to the Mike Sullivan news, and it makes sense for Pittsburgh. They have needed a change in direction, and I think this is an affirmation that that era of the last 10 to 15 years, that Penguins team that won back-to-back cups, that's over now. That there's no more, we're trying to make the playoffs or trying to win this year. Instead, it's a more prolonged, protracted, okay, we have 2 more years of Sidney Crosby. We have 2 more years of Letang. We have 2 more years of Evgeny Malkin. We know we're probably not winning anything with those guys. So let's start putting our next wave of guys in a position to succeed. And I do think that's important because for much of the last 2.5, 3 years, that's been the Penguins' issue. They've been trying to have it both ways. And this past year was kind of the turning point in that where they just didn't have it very early on. And they went on a few prolonged runs. They hung around maybe a little longer than people thought they would, by part, same way the Rangers did. The East was terrible. It didn't take a whole lot. You had one good week. If you went 3-1 in the week, you were right back in the mix where you were.
Have you seen Montreal try to defend Washington? Like, I mean, come on. Yeah, the spot was there.
The spot was there for the taking. But for Mike Sullivan, he's a good coach. Unequivocally, you win 2 Stanley Cups, and yes, he did it with an all-time great team. Those 2 Penguins teams were truly great. If you go back and look, I mean, they had the luxury of playing Phil Kessel on their third line. That's how deep those teams were. They had the perfect first pair in Letang and Dumoulin for where the NHL was at 8 years ago. And now Mike Sullivan needs to recalibrate. I know the Rangers will not be the only suitor. I would venture to say Mike Sullivan is probably going to be the most in-demand coach of this cycle. And that means that if Chris Drury is as infatuated with Mike Sullivan as we've been led to believe over the last 3 to 4 years, and he doesn't come away with him, I think we can venture to say that the Rangers have a bit of a stink on them. And I am definitely worried about that in some respect, because from what I gather, and look, he only got fired today. We probably won't get the nuts and bolts of what were the differences of opinion there. But my assumption is he wanted a little more, input as far as what Kyle Dubas was doing and the way they were trying to put that team together. So we know how much Chris Drury likes sharing his authority and taking input from others. So if that's a deal breaker here, and I would venture to say, and I'll throw it to you in a second, I would venture to say you'd probably get more of that in Boston because Don Sweeney has a little more desperation to him. And that roster is barren. Like there is room for input on, well, we like this guy, we don't like this guy, versus the Rangers, who are pretty locked into everybody other than K'Andre Miller and Zach Jones and Will Cooley. Other than that, Rangers are pretty locked in. There's not a lot of room for a coach to give input on putting together a roster.
I mean, I'd argue that the conversation for Mike Sullivan to the Rangers has been happening since the Four Nations, only because this man healthy scratched Kyle Connor to play a broken Chris Kreider in the most important game of the tournament. And then rightfully he got stink on his face as a result, because why would you ever decide that? He did that. And that's that's one of my concerns with Mike Sullivan. Like, he's been a great coach, and the last few years, he's obviously not blameless. Like I'm sure there's, little things along the way that if you were a Pittsburgh fan and have watched every Pittsburgh,
a lot of Jeff Carter game, 2 years ago, a lot of Jeff Carter 2 years ago, sticking with Yari in all of those playoffs that they fell apart in. There are examples. Yeah, there are examples of roster mistakes and other kinds of issues along the way. No head coach is ever perfect. Everybody's going to make, mistakes. Everybody's going to have their favorites, regardless of what the stats or common sense or the tape shows you. Like, everybody has their kind of way of, dispersing players and kind of their own way of being the bench leader. But it is a question that needs to be asked in the grand scheme of things of like, okay, the Rangers have had deployment issues for like 20 years.
where every coach that would come in would have their like favorites to the nth degree and continue to ride them until the wheels fall off. But, and then you look at Mike Sullivan and you go, okay, well, Kyle Connor, one of the best shooters on the planet, great player. You bench him for Chris Kreider, a guy who had back issues. I think he said he was having surgery or something along the lines, this summer. Like, he's not healthy. And you knew he wasn't healthy when you were coaching him in the tourney. And you played him anyway. You sat Kyle Connor, and now, and then you ended up losing the game. So, it's one little example, but I wonder how that translates to the Rangers roster if he gets hired. Because again, Gallant had his favorites where he played Zibanejad and all those guys, and and Laviolette the same way. He played all those guys. There was no accountability. The guys that actually tried to win games were never on the ice, and it was always the same guys and always the same power play this season with no changes. And I wonder how that would work with a Mike Sullivan system. I would imagine, there'd be at least some efforts to diverge from that. But that Four Nations example really just sticks out to me as a why did you do this type of move? And that is one of my questions that I'm thinking about as we talk about potentially Mike Sullivan being the next head coach of the Rangers.
So as far as Mike Sullivan goes, one thing I did want to mention, and we talk about this a lot in regards to John Cooper, something I give Mike Sullivan a lot of credit for, and not a lot of coaches in the NHL are particularly good at this, but actually making sense when they talk to the media and putting effort into their responses and trying to be articulate and explaining how they think. Because as I always say, I don't need to agree with what you're doing, but I do need to understand what you're trying to do. If I can draw a conclusion based on what you're putting together, okay, great. But if you're telling me, well, we're probably not going to make the playoffs, but we're not going to play our GM's first 2 first-round picks in games where we have a less than 1% chance of making the playoffs, you're insulting my intelligence a little bit. Saying, well, they got to sit and learn with the coaches who aren't going to be here in 2 weeks, you're insulting my intelligence a little bit. Whereas you talk about John Cooper, Mike Sullivan, those two in particular stick out as always being able to really explain things in a meaningful and articulate way. And I do think that would be refreshing. That was one of my biggest critiques of Gerard Gallant was he never took media availability seriously at all. He gave terrible answers. He didn't put a lot of effort into them. And frankly, he was always a little curt and short with people for no real reason other than people trying to do their jobs. And look, I understand most people have an interesting perspective on what they think of sports media and the relationship they have with the people they cover. But a little bit of decorum for the people trying to do their job is not the end of the world. Like, just a little professional courtesy goes a long way in fostering a good mentality, because that tells me something about you as a person. If you can put that little bit of effort into your interactions with other people, that tells me you're not an asshole. That tells me that you understand these people have a job to do and you're respectful of their time. You're not wasting your time. You're not, you'll find out later about insignificant lineup decisions. Like, if they're playing, just tell them. Someone tweeting, oh yeah, this fourth liner's in over this fourth liner's in is not a tactical advantage. You are just making that person's life more difficult because you're the one in charge and you get to control things. So I do think it would be refreshing to have a coach who can actually explain what they're thinking. And I do agree with you. And I definitely was texting with Hunter Hodes this morning about this, about just the Mike Sullivan experience and the flaws. Yeah, like any coach, they have their over loyalties. And I do think some of that Team USA stuff was, well, Chris Kreider's never going to get a chance to represent Team USA again, and we got to get him in the lineup for these games. And well, that's not a good way to run a hockey team. I can at least understand that from a logic and what they're trying to do perspective as far as that goes. I guess the next thing we should talk about is some of the other candidates, because this is the first priority of this offseason, is finding a coach that is going to implement ideologically what they're trying to do. Because it does seem like, and you and I have talked about this extensively, Andrew, that Drury never really seemed that enthusiastic about Gallant or Laviolette as his head coach, that these were just kind of the best choices. You know, you think about who they interviewed 3 years ago, rather, when they picked Gallant, and like Rick Tocchet was really the only other coach they seriously considered. And then last year, you know, we supposed
Rick Tocchet.
We're going to get to Rick Tocchet.
I need to find out who his PR team is, because
he's boys with Gretzky. That's the answer to that question.
I guess.
All right, so
you know who else is friends with Wayne Gretzky? Oh, well, we won't go there.
If you are curious about Rick Tocchet, I would like you to open up whatever your preferred web browser is and search Rick Tocchet Operation Slapshot. If you read that, you will get an understanding as to why everybody in hockey media and around the league loves Rick Tocchet. And I tweeted this on Friday, what's your favorite hockey conspiracy theory? And a lot of people responded with this. The supposition is that Rick Tocchet was the one who kind of ate the blame for a gambling ring that Wayne Gretzky and his wife Janet were involved in back in the 90s or the early 2000s when he was the coach of the Coyotes. And based on that, this is the same way we all suppose that teams keep giving Jack Johnson contracts because they feel bad his parents took all his money. There's just a collective understanding that, hey, we take care of this guy because of X. And that's the supposition.
Unrelated, if you feel bad for Jack Johnson, just give him like a
job.
Yeah, just give him a job.
Give him a job. Make him assistant.
He can't play, so just give him a job. Like
assistant to the regional manager.
Right,
Come on,
exactly.
Assistant to the assistant of the general manager.
Yeah. An advisor.
Yeah.
Or like just give him some title and just have him walk around the building. Like
speaking of that, you know, I got into an argument a week or so ago on Twitter with somebody who kept telling me, well, they should hire Mark Messier for something. And I was like, well, he doesn't really have any experience. And I feel like where the Rangers are at, you kind of need someone with experience to steward them along. And the person replied, he was special advisor to Glenn Sather from 2007 to 2010. Okay. What do you think special advisor to the general manager entails? I don't think Mark was, cutting up tape. I don't think he was evaluating AHL players in his free time. I think he wanted to dip his toes in front office work and see if there was a path to becoming GM. When he realized Glenn Sather was going to be there for a while, he said, screw this. And he went into relative obscurity until he circled back around to being on TV in the last few years on ESPN. So as for Rick Tocchet, he has 9 years as an NHL head coach. He has made the real playoffs one time. He made the Fugazi bubble playoffs one time. 2 for 9 does not keep you in the lineup in Major League Baseball. 2 for 9 is not a great enough threshold. I don't think there's enough of a track record of A, just quality play, and B, if he had a great track record of player development, okay, but like he's largely taken over relatively established teams. And yeah, those Coyote teams he got at the beginning were kind of stinky, but like you had Clayton Keller, and Clayton Keller hasn't really popped off till the last year or two. I don't really see it as far as Rick Tocchet beyond him being a good dude. And like we did that with Gallant. Like we did the everybody likes him thing already. He's a great guy to be around, former player, knows what players want. All of that stuff is great in theory, but Rick Tocchet last played as a player 23 years ago. What he thinks an NHL player is and what an NHL player is now, those are very different things. You know, we were talking about this a few weeks ago in regards to JJ Redick and Mark Messier, where Redick's not that far removed from being a player, so he's a little more in tune with where guys are at now. If you want to say Rick Tocchet, he knows what it takes to be a good player, sure. But we know that doesn't necessarily correlate with being a good coach. John Cooper never played serious professional hockey at a high level, and he went to law school and was a lawyer and then got into coaching. So there is no one-size-fits-all way of thinking about this. But I think if we're hiring, an Arizona and Vancouver cast-off, I do think, again, that's like the Soucy and the Borgen and the Vakanainen conversation. If this guy's not good enough for Vancouver, why are we hiring him? That's the way I look at it when it comes to these coaching decisions and some of these player decisions.
Well, that, and you take a look at what happened in Vancouver this season.
Yeah.
Like the Canucks were supposed to be one of the best teams in the league. They were supposed to be the well-oiled machine that we saw them be last year, which begs the question, okay, well, last season, Laviolette, everything was going well. The team was winning all these games. Vancouver, everything was going well. They were winning all these games. And now this season, the Rangers, everything went as astronomically poorly as they possibly could have been. They missed the playoffs. Vancouver, everything went astronomically poorly and missed the playoffs. This is the same man, just with a different suit on. Like this is from an outsider's perspective. If you just zoom out, you take a look at these two franchises the past 2 seasons. Essentially the same thing happened in both situations. Yeah, Vancouver's stuff was, I guess, like more interpersonal and more of like inside the locker room. Nothing was going well. Whereas with the Rangers, some of it was outside and like the Kreider trade rumors and like that. The outside stuff a little bit, but it's still a lot of the same results. So I just don't know what Rick Tocchet would bring to the table as a coach himself that would fundamentally change the way this team operates. Because the reason you fire your head coach, Nick, I don't know if you know this, is to bring in somebody else who coaches differently. Because the current way of coaching clearly did not work out for you. That's why anybody ever fires a head coach. So if you bring in the same guy with a different face to coach the same exact way, guess what is going to happen? Like, you're not going to get different results, and you're going to look around and be like, but we got a new head coach.
But we got Wayne Gretzky's
What happened?
He's Wayne Gretzky's friend.
Yeah,
Great.
If you want fundamental change, I hate to break it to you, but you need someone that will coach differently. Like that shouldn't be breaking news.
And the Rangers need somebody who can manage the people skills, because that has unequivocally been an issue, that this is a group that is a group of conduits. They don't have any conductors. They don't have anyone who drives the bus on their own. We were talking about it before we started recording. The Oilers pulled off a great comeback last night because they played their best players every 2 or 3 shifts for 30 straight minutes. For the entirety of that overtime and the third period, McDavid, Draisaitl, and Bouchard were out there with some permutation of like Jake Wallman or Nurse and then Perry or Hyman. I don't think the Rangers have 5 guys I would trust to play every second or third shift for 30 straight minutes.
You wouldn't want Zibanejad, Kreider, and whomstever as the forward group, and Panarin maybe, hopefully. Like, you wouldn't want them on the ice for 60 to the 20 minutes that the Rangers needed a goal for. Is that what you're suggesting?
And this is something. If you go back and watch the episode after the Rangers lost to the Devils, you read the column I wrote for my Substack after the Rangers lost to the Devils, the Rangers stars just don't have dog in them. Like, the Rangers stars do not have that next year, all right, I'll do it myself, the same way that McDavid does, the way Draisaitl does, the way Nathan McKinnon does, the way that some of the best players, the way Matthew Tkachuk and Barkov do, where if the game is on the line, they want the responsibility. And you think about that in comparison to this Rangers group, where all year it's been, well, the vibes aren't great. They're distressed because of they got rid of Gaudreau and Trouba, and they're not
trying hard, Nick.
They're trying hard, and trying hard is great. Winning is the goal here. The goal is not to try. The goal is to win, and you see it. And I say this all the time, and it's funny. It's from dodgeball, but sports don't build character; they reveal it. You learned a lot about the Rangers' character as a group this year, because when things got bad, it became unconscionably bad. 5-15 from the end of November through the end of December is why they are not in the playoffs right now. Because again, if they go 10-10 as opposed to 5-15, they make the playoffs. 10-10 is not some unreachable, insane threshold. And that's all I need to know about anyone who is on this team right now. And as much as I'm glad that Trocheck is going to be the next captain conversation has died out because of the way the second half of the season went, there is not a captain on this team. There is not somebody who takes things by the reins and says, okay, we're going to figure this out ourselves. Because if there were, at any point this year, an adult would have gotten things under control. And that includes the coach. Don't get me wrong. If there was a serious leader in this group, Laviolette would have been able to get a handle on this. But instead, it spiraled out of control to the degree that they missed the playoffs entirely. And you are living with the consequences of that. And as much as I bemoan the players Chris Drury acquires and the vision he has for the team, he can't be running this like it's a social club. He can't be running this on the, well, these guys are friends, I can't get rid of them, because that's not a professional sports team. You know, I know in talking to my Islander fan friends that was their critique of a lot of the last few years of Lou Lamoriello, was he was just unwilling to get rid of anyone. You know, they're probably going to end up having to get rid of Scott Mayfield and Pierre Engvall this summer. They might just be outright bought out. And we all looked around and said those contracts were atrocious the day they were signed. But when you run a team on the mindset of, well, everyone likes each other so much, again, you are not fulfilling your goal. Your goal as a GM is to assemble the best roster you possibly can to play how you want to play.
By the way, as an aside, it's I don't mean to cut you off, but like it's really incredible that Lou Lamoriello went from 30 years ago, like being in these secret hotel rooms, getting Russian players to come here and defect and play in the National Hockey League. He went from being, you know, somebody that was breaking barriers and being like one of the most like leading general managers in the like in professional sports to, oh, I can't get rid of Matt Martin. People like him.
The Matt Martin Memorial Scholarship will be remembered. The Matt Martin, the Cal Clutterbuck, like just bringing guys back for the vibes. And again, yes, do GMs have to be somewhat considerate? They do. Chris Drury does not need to sit down and explain to the guys on the team, yeah, well, I'm getting rid of this player because he's not good. That's not how sports work, okay? There's not a GM in the league who is going to call a meeting and announce, yeah, guys, I am trading player X. Now, if you're Sidney Crosby, you're Nathan McKinnon, Connor McDavid, will you get advised of something that's about to happen? Most of the time, yes. Not every transaction, but big ones, seismic ones, you know, changing the coach, something like that. And again, I am not a Drury defender in the slightest bit. I think he has done a very poor job of assembling a roster. He has largely learned his lesson by doing it, as opposed to just looking at the track records of the players he already had or the players he acquired. But getting it back to the coaching, once you get past Sullivan and Tocchet, we're talking about the greatest hits. We're talking about Bruce Boudreau, Claude Julien. We're not bringing Gallant back, I can be sure of that. But we're talking about these guys who have okay track records. Maybe Andrew Brunette gets let go in Nashville, but I feel like if they were going to do that, they would have done that already. But there's not exactly a slam dunk here. You know, once you get past Sullivan, frankly, this is a pretty uninspiring group, unless you want to go off the beaten path. You know, if you're looking at Jay Leach or David Carl or somebody who hasn't been in any...
not be a Chicago Blackhawk,
yes.
By the way.
Oh, God, that job would be miserable to take.
Miserable.
Like, yes, you as the coach, you would get a crazy contract to jump from college to the NHL. So that would give you a little bit of security. But at the same time, like, you know, Kyle Davidson's clock is ticking. And again, that's what we said last week about Drury. Like,
there's no reason for David Carl to take the Blackhawks job. You are winning at every level before you get to the NHL. You're head coaching a team in the NCAA that is not only winning everything now, but like continues to get top of the line prospects to come to your program because of who you are and the program that you've built. And you're going to leave that to coach a Chicago team that's missed the playoffs in the last like 10, you know, past 10 years. And that really doesn't know what they're doing currently. So you know, if I'm Dave, like I can see why David Carl would be like, probably not that one for my first job in the NHL.
And the other part of it is you can be choosy when you're that guy. Yeah. You can wait for the perfect situation to take over. You know, if you want to wait to see what happens in Carolina or what happens in maybe somewhere like San Jose, where you know that the coach they currently have is not going to be there when they're ready to compete, but you'll have the opportunity to walk into a team with Celebrini, with Will Smith, and a couple other nice pieces. So you wait for the ideal job. That's why I don't think he's a serious candidate for the Rangers job, just because you're lining yourself up for a difficult situation. Like, yes, you get to live in New York, you get paid a lot of money. Those things are nice. But when you have a good thing, chasing that greener grass is not always going to manifest in the way you want it. And when you think about this group, I mean, it really does seem like the only one I would feel moderately good about is Mike Sullivan. Like, could you talk me into Boudreaux? Sure. His teams are always good in the regular season. They score a lot of goals. They don't play good defense.
In the regular season.
Yes,
That's
of course. Boudreaux's never won anything in the playoffs. He's been a consistently good regular season coach, won the President's Trophy with Washington a couple times, has consistently generated more offense on the teams he's taken over.
I'd argue Bruce Boudreaux is a bad hire because of that.
Yeah.
I don't particularly care about President's Trophy wins. I want Stanley Cups.
I mean, Bruce Boudreaux is also like 70 years old, so sure. I don't think I do think that's also a bit of a concern as well. I do think he's a decent coach, but again, we talk about this all the time. There's like 7 coaches who make a difference. Other than that, they're all pretty interchangeable. You know, you talk about Tortorella, who we didn't mention yet, but God willing, I hope that doesn't happen because that would be stupid. Like,
mention them in the open. Along with David Quinn.
Yeah. But like the thing with Tortorella, and I've seen so many people say this on various social platforms, they just want someone to yell at this team because of how mad they were about this year. And like, that would be fun for like a week. It'd be like if he were to sit Zibanejad for a game, he'd get a standing ovation the next game. But like, that's not going to materially get them where they want to go. And I think that's kind of the problem. I think so many people just want like their pound of flesh for this season going wrong that they think of Tortorella in the vein of, well, he's going to come in and he's going to run the tightest ship imaginable. Okay. This group wilted under not that difficult of circumstances. So you're going to punt a second straight season to teach a lesson? That's like the parent who makes their kids smoke the whole pack of cigarettes when they catch them smoking one. You're going to learn your lesson, and then they're just going to get sick and maybe develop a nicotine addiction. Sure, bring in Tortorella to let him yell at people for a week or two, and then realize how quickly that gets old and how quickly the team would just tune him out, and we would be right back to square one. I think I venture to say I think John Tortorella as a useful NHL coach has run his shelf life. You know, he's got a ridiculous amount of games coached. He's got what I wrote this down. John Tortorella's all-time record is 770, 648, 37 ties, and 165 overtime losses. Baby. That's how long John Tortorella has been an NHL coach. A preposterous amount of games. His career points percentage is under 500, which I do think is worth bringing up. I know he's taken over some crappy situations, and like the Flyers the last few years, they didn't have the
Columbus as well.
Well, he made the playoffs a couple times with Columbus, so you get credit for making the playoffs for a team like Columbus, but there are not a lot of inspiring candidates here. Like even Mike Sullivan, like he's unequivocally the most decorated resume wise, but like there's a reason Pittsburgh hasn't been able to do what they wanted to do. And some of that is that they've bet bad, you know, they bet on Ryan Graves.
Roster has not been good.
They bet on Tristan Jarry, you know, they bet on pieces who really let them down, you know, getting so little for, targeting Michael Bunting as the Jake Gensel return. Yeah. Like, again, it's not only Mike Sullivan's fault they haven't been good the last few years, but it's definitely something to consider. And I said this to you before, and I'll say it now. In the history of the NHL, which is more than 100 years at this point, 3 coaches in the history of the sport have won a Stanley Cup with multiple franchises. Scotty Bowman, Dick Irvin, and Tommy Gorman. 3 coaches in 100 years have done that. This is not like the NFL. And it's more prescient in the NFL teams. It's happened a little more frequently in the NFL than in the NHL. But it's hard to do because you need so much to go right just to win 1, let alone to win 2. So I do think that's something to consider as well. But until the Rangers knock and I don't even feel like getting the right coach is going to do a whole lot. Like, even if you get Mike Sullivan, are you going to get Zibanejad to play better? Are you going to get Tocchet to play better? This is the exact same conversation we had when they fired when they fired Gallant and ultimately ended up with Laviolette. Unless you have someone who can magically get these guys to play harder, it's hard for me to believe that things are going to change all that much.
I want to bring this up from this comment that we got. And this is from Gerard Gallant's PR team. And they say, and New York is a coach killing city. Gallant still hasn't found a coaching job in the league. And the response to that is, have you talked to this man? Like, he is incredibly condescending at all times, which probably doesn't help the fact that, he can't get a job. Also, he got thoroughly outcoached and outraced in the Devil series.
He got outwitted by Lindy Ruff, which I think is pretty disqualifying. Like Lindy Ruff is an atrocious coach in 2020.
Gerard Gallant was one of the biggest drivers for the Rangers blowing that series to the Devils a couple of years ago. So New York is a coach-killing city is an asinine thing to say. Like,
I wouldn't go that far. I do think there is something to that. This core has continually come up short, and changing the coach hasn't coaxed significantly.
But that's a core issue, not New York is a coach-killing city issue. That I feel like is wrong. The current core continuing to not care who's coaching because they just don't care about playing hard, but they do care about trying for some reason. That's a valid conversation. And but the city itself being like, "Oh, you didn't win you didn't win this year, so you're out of here." I don't come on, spare me.
So the one thing I would add on to that, there was conjecture that Gallant was up for the Flames job before they ended up hiring Huska, and the precursor to that was he wanted more money than the Flames were willing to spend. So he has been in the mix for jobs. I will say I do think he might need to bring his demands a little bit lower, because a team that's going to take a chance on him is going to be a smaller market team that kind of wants some of his credibility to buoy them. I know he was linked to the Columbus job that ultimately ended up going to Dean Evison this past year. So he's in the mix. He is not out of the cycle. He's not like Claude Julien, where it seems like it's just not going to happen again. And look, Claude Julien's a little bit older and is a little bit further removed from a track record of success up in Boston. But I do think Gallant has hung around in the conversation. He's been continued to be named. The one thing I will say before we transition to talking a little bit more about the team, I am glad that the two worst candidates that are on this cycle, David Quinn and John Tortorella, are probably out of the mix for the Rangers because they've already been here. I'm very glad I am not a team that is going to have to consider hiring David Quinn for some godforsaken reason. I mean, the track record there is abysmal, like on every level, even as an assistant. Like, he was the Penguins defensive coach the last 2 years under Mike Sullivan, and you look at the Penguins defense and you don't understand what he's doing. The Rangers were the single worst defensive team in the entire NHL for the 3-year window David Quinn was their head coach. They gave up more scoring chances than any team in the entire NHL over a 3-year period with David Quinn at the helm. And that was a team that had Adam Fox, Jacob Trouba, the corpse of Mark Stahl, Tony DeAngelo. Like, this wasn't like a piecemeal rebuilding effort like, say, San Jose or Chicago, where it was 6 misfit toys on the back end. Like, David Quinn had NHL caliber players, and they were just that bad defensively. Other than the 50 games, they had Jacques Martin as the defensive coach, which actually went pretty well and was the one decent defensive season under Quinn. But as we move ahead, I did want to ask you this. As we're sitting here right now, with no coach, with a roster that feels tapped out, that there's not a lot more to squeeze out of this, is there anything they could do to give you a sense of confidence? Whether that's the guys on the team, whether that's the GM, is there a single move? And like, I'm not saying a specific player or anything. Is there something they could do to kind of steady the waters, to kind of calm things down a little bit after they figure out the coach? Is there a specific position, like, a first line right wing, a first pair left defenseman? Is there anything that comes to mind as far as kind of bringing the temperature down and trying to calm everyone's nerves they could do to put you at ease?
I would think starting by getting a 1 LD would help a lot, only because like currently the solution is like Carson Soucy apparently, or like Will Borgen, and that is just an abject failure. So I would start and I don't have a specific name in mind. Obviously, getting a first pair defenseman to play with Adam Fox is, one, not going to be cheap, and 2, going to be very difficult to have that come together. But if Drury were to turn around and be like, okay, so, I have, I'm just making things up right now, but like, okay, I have K'Andre Miller here, who's going to be an RFA. He's kind of the we talked about this, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago. Like, he's the ultimate Mario Kart, a box, like mystery box of sometimes it's good, sometimes it's a single coin, and you're like, what the hell did I just drive over that box for? Like, that's a lot of K'Andre Miller's play. And, if he looks around and says, okay, if I can acquire X player that will really, that will really elevate that pair with Adam and have that be one of the best pairs in the league, and I have to trade K'Andre Miller or somebody else or whoever it is to make it happen. And he pulls that off without trading, Gabriel Perreault or some other like ridiculous name to the mix. That would be a good step in the right direction. Obviously, there'd be massive other holes, such as the rest of the blue line. And as you mentioned, they still haven't found a replacement for Pavel Buchnevich. By the way, scored a hat trick in Game 3. Hill, I will die on forever. I'm going to buy a Buchnevich jersey at this point. But there's still so many issues with this team that one big swing isn't going to fix. However, if you would bring in somebody that is going to play with Adam Fox consistently and play well because he is a good defenseman and can play with Adam Fox, and that will be an incredible pairing, okay, now we're starting to move in that direction. Until then, you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place right now.
I agree with you. I think that getting that first pair left defenseman to play with Adam Fox is the single biggest priority, because Fox is not old by any measure, but you've burned 5 years of his career already. He's been in the NHL since 2019. He has been one of the 5 or 6 best defensemen in the entire league for pretty much the duration of his NHL career.
Think about how bad this team would be defensively if Adam Fox was not here.
I mean, and we're talking about somebody who is a consensus top 10 player at his position amongst people who know what they're talking about. And that wasn't enough this year. He was so overwhelmed with the environment around him being bad that there are people who actually think he's a bad hockey player. There are people who say he's too slow. I do enjoy thoroughly the people who always say when a defenseman's playing poorly, he should play forward, as if there's any correlation between the two. You think Adam Fox is slow as a defenseman. Do you really want him being the first pass on a breakout, trying to skate as fast as he can? That's just incongruous with the realities of the position.
The one player that would make sense for that is K'Andre Miller, because he played forward for most of his career.
And you already sank 5 years into making him a defenseman. If you want to do the sunk cost fallacy, and that's not a good idea, they should try and do it to maximize his value, whatever. But at the same time, you're already complaining about him not being physical enough. So you're going to enjoy watching a 6'5" guy not pressure people on the forecheck, not throw that big thumping hit on the way in. That's something I do think the Rangers need. They need more guys who have that to their game, other than Cooley and other than Rempe, because it's an imperative part of today's NHL that even when you're not generating offense, that you are pressuring the other team in their end and making them just work. Because that's one of the real keys to defanging a team that's really dangerous offensively. And the Oilers did a good job of this last night in their game against the Kings. Fiala and Kempe have been destroying them in this series. They're both over 1.5 per game so far through 4. And down the backstretch of this game, the Oilers just kept making them play defense. And when was the last time the Rangers just hemmed another team's best players in their own end for an extended period of time and just outworked them? And some of that is mindset. And I do think that matters, that the Rangers' best players just don't have that mentality to them. Connor McDavid is not a great forechecker or a great physical checker. But when the game is down and on the line, he's more than willing to throw his body into a play and trying to win one of those puck battles. And same thing with Draisaitl.
Nick, be careful when you speak about thumping hits. You could spawn Sam Bennett and Brett Marchand on this team. Chris Bernard, yes. I mean, listen, yeah. You fly too close to the sun and your wings are gonna melt off. Nick, you gotta be real careful.
In an ideal world, that's Berard and Othman's job on this team next year. That's the ideal outcome, is those guys develop into third line wingers who can really check and really cycle and really just sustain offensive zone time. And look, will that result in a ton of offense? No. You look at what Kakko, Cooley, and Hedl did for the first 2 months of this season and why the Rangers seemed to not value all that much, I can't possibly understand. But getting back to the initial conversation, I do want to say also, for everybody who is this excited to exile, Kreider, Zibanejad, whomstever, the other part of that is you do need to replace that offense. Like we talked about this 2 weeks ago. Zibanejad had like an 80-goal swing year over year between even strength and special teams, between how much worse they were on the power play and how much worse they were at 5-on-5. Okay, so even if you want to say Zibanejad was bad this year, which he was, you still need to replace the offense you got this year and then at least some of the offense you got from last year. And that's really the conundrum, because right now, if you want to say, well, everything went bad this year, they're going to bounce back to some degree next year. Sure, I'll give you that. I do think there's some room for positive regression that'll get them a little bit closer to last year. But that said,
plus also new head coach bump as well.
New head coach bump is real. That is something that does matter. It was the argument that you should have had in December when the Bruins fired Jim Montgomery, and you could have pulled the ripcord on this season. And you know what Jim Montgomery's good at, Andrew? Coaching defense, something the Rangers could desperately have used this year.
Would that
have made a huge difference this year? Probably not, but you had that in front of you. You could say the same thing about Michael Pekka or Dan Muse, where you could have given them 10 or 20 games as the interim head coach if you were really curious about them, which you seem to be because you're keeping them in the organization, even though you might have a new coach come in and say, I don't really want those guys. But getting back to what I was saying before, if you want to get rid of Zibanejad, Tocchet, Kreider, Panarin, whomstever, whatever, okay, you do need to replace that. And I don't know if everybody's aware of this, but there is not exactly a robust pool of free agents that's expected to be there on July 1st. As Chris said, Brad Marchand, Sam Bennett, John Tavares will be there. Mitch Marner will be there, but he will be out of the Rangers' price range. Matt Duchene will be there. And then once you get past that, the drop-off is stark. And do you really want, 34-year-old John Tavares being the first line right wing for 3 years? I could think of worse outcomes, but that's not materially solving the Rangers' issue. You could say the same thing for Sam Bennett, who is a useful, functional hockey player, and the same thing for Brad Marchand, who is still a pretty decent hockey player. Yes. Are they effective? Yes. Are they better than what the Rangers have currently? Debatably. But you are banking on more guys in their early to mid 30s continuing to stave off Father Time. And Father Time is undefeated. Father Time comes for everybody eventually. And you could even make an argument, Andrew, that Father Time has already come for some of these Rangers, whether you want to talk about Trocheck, Kreider, or Zibanejad. So it's not just that you need to get rid of the weak links, if you will. You also need to replace them and replace them with something better. It's not just, let's get Zibanejad out of here, and then we're going to sign Matt Duchene to be the first line right wing. Those are effectively the same guy. That is a supplementary piece that is going to be dependent on his line mates to create offense. Matt Duchene probably a little bit cheaper. You won't be locked in until 2030, but that's not solving your problem. And I do think it's important that we emphasize this because the Rangers get so caught up in, we'll just replace him. And that's how you go from Trouba to Borgen. Like, is Borgen better than Trouba? Yes. By how much? Not a lot, but enough. But is Will Borgen playing on the Lightning, on the Panthers, on the Golden Knights, on the Leafs? It's debatable. And that's kind of a problem. If you're acquiring guys on the premise that they're better than what you have, but they're still not good enough to be on good teams, does it really matter all that much?
Yeah, I mean, you got to take a look around and say, okay, well, if I'm going to trade for this player, I'm going to play him minutes. Will he would he get the same amount of minutes on a team that's actively playing for the Stanley Cup? Like, if you put him on I know the Jets are playing really well in the last 2 games. Well, is Urho Vakanainen playing on that Jets roster? I mean, maybe for Logan Salem because that man can't defend, but I'm not, I wouldn't be very confident with Urho Vakanainen back there either. Like, it's one of those things where, would these guys be playing on, would you play Vakanainen instead of Oliver Ekman-Larsson on Florida?
Toronto.
Toronto. Yeah. I still
last year.
I still have him winning the cup in my head in Florida. Yeah, but in Toronto, it's at least neither player can defend, but at least Oliver Ekman-Larsson can create things offensively. Urho Vakanainen cannot do any of that at all. So even the marginal guys on these teams, I just don't see where some of these Rangers that Drury gave extensions to, by the way, are going to play. And that therein lies a lot of the problem where, okay, your blue line was one of the worst in the league, and a lot of the guys that you traded for and have extended wouldn't even be playing on a lot of the teams that are currently playing for the Stanley Cup. So what, like, you know, I feel like I say this every week, like, what was the point? Why would you trade for all these people replacing, quote unquote, air quotes, the guys that, you know, you wanted to remove, but you didn't actively make the situation better? The whole point of replacing players is to get improvements, but you don't change, like, you're changing the name on the back, but the play is the exact same. So what was the point?
Yeah, I made the joke a few weeks ago. You went from poop to butt. Like, yes, objectively, you didn't shit your pants anymore, but you're still butt. You're still bad. And that's kind of the problem. Like, you look at this team.
Somebody please clip that. Please, somebody.
You didn't shit your pants anymore, but you're still ass. And that's the Rangers' problem. Like, it's great you stopped shitting your pants, Chris Drury, but, like, is the team good? No. Like, your big swing was JT Miller, and the 5-on-5 results got worse with JT Miller in the mix. And you were a 500 hockey team when you under 500 hockey team, excuse me, and you dropped a point per game player in here. You kept telling us, oh, the problem is our star players don't play with enough dog in them. And you dropped the dog in here, and it did make a difference because the defense was so unbelievably bad. It didn't matter how good the offense was. And the offense wasn't that good to begin with. You know, they were underwater 5-on-5 pretty much all season long. The power play regressed. It was 9-10% worse than last year. And that was the season. You know, if your power play is 5% worse instead of 10% worse, you might have snuck into the playoffs. If you went 10-10 instead of 5-15, you might have snuck into the playoffs. You had so many different escape hatches you could have yanked on to save this season.
Be more assertive, SpongeBob. You can have it.
That's what they did. If you looked at the opening night roster the Rangers had and you compared it to Ottawa or Montreal, you would take the Rangers if we ran that season 100 times, because more likely than not, the Rangers' best players would be able to make up enough of the difference between them, Ottawa, and Montreal that over the course of 100 simulations, you would expect the Rangers to prevail. I mean, we went into last season saying the forward group was better than the one that went to Game 6 of the conference finals because we liked Riley Smith better than Blake Wheeler, and we saw Lafreniere take a real step in his development, and the only real conversation was who's going to fill out the fourth line. And then the defense was so bad, it didn't matter. I cannot fathom how the defense was this bad. And Chris Drury's priority was to ensure it and like keep it. Like, they played 17 games of Will Borgen and said 5 years, which is batshit insane. To give out a 5-year extension based on 17 games when you had control of him through the end of the season, like, would it have been that hard to say, hey, we like you, we would like to extend you, but we want to see how you acclimate here before we go distance? Because now you have 4 third-pair defensemen, Adam Fox and Keandre Miller, and that's your group. That's the group that's going to turn this team from the 6th or 7th team in the Metro to one of the top 3 or a wild card. I really struggle to imagine a coach, even if it's Mike Sullivan, is going to be able to coax that significantly a different of result, unless you want to say, well, they're going to get more luck. And sure, they should, because they had none this year. But I don't think that's enough of a material change from your general manager to coax that out of you. And we say it all the time. Doing the same thing over and over again is crazy. But here we are, about to do the same thing over again. And sure, are they going to get rid of one of Zibanejad or Kreider or both? Maybe. Okay. Do you have someone in mind to replace that 60 to 80 points that those guys are liable for each? No? Okay. So it's going to be Perreault or Othman then. I wish you the best of luck with that.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, it's all of this boils down to, oh, well, everything that went wrong, like, you saw all of the things that happened this season, and then the news of, oh, Chris Drury gets a multi-year extension. It's like, and I've heard, you know, I've talked to some people and they're, you know, they've told me that, oh, okay, well, if this happens again, then, you know, Dolan is going to eat the money and let Drury go. And like, the contract isn't a safety net. Like it from what I understand, a lot of this multi-year extension is like, we're going to give you a bunch of money because we want to see one more year of you, and you won't sign a 1-year extension. But if this happens again, you are out of here. And Jim Dolan is okay with eating that money if it gets to that. That is my understanding of the situation. However, you just saw what happened this year. The blue line is a disaster fire. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And your way of fixing things is to give that guy more runway. Like, that's, so it's very interesting to see, like, I just don't know how. And yeah, I mean, there's going to be better luck this year than next year than it was this year by default, only because the Rangers have negative luck this year and everything that could possibly went wrong for them did. But you zoom out and you go, okay, well, you have Will Borgen for 5 years, you have Vaakanainen for 2 more years for some reason. Like, you have all of these guys that Drury doesn't want Zach Jones. It's very obvious he doesn't want Zach Jones. And despite Zach Jones playing well, despite playing once every, 70 years, and like, there's no consensus on what the blue line should look like for this team. They haven't looked, you get a brand new blue line, and it is it continues to be one of the worst in the league. So it's very just baffling to me that you watch your defensemen give up chance after chance, game after game, and you say, you know what would be the best course of action is to give them stability, is to extend these guys and keep paying them to play the way that they've been playing. Normally, Nick, I don't know if you know this, but you give out extensions to players that play well, and I just don't understand that.
But they try hard, Andrew.
Yeah, but they try. I still, I mean, like I said before, give Nick a contract, give me a contract, and have us play. We'll try our best too. You'll get, all bad results, but you're getting bad results now. So what's the difference? Just sign us. We'll be cheaper. So, I mean, listen, and we'll try, we'll give good answers. Like, we'll be good in the locker room. We have bangers to play it out of the speakers. Just sign us. We'll do it.
You know what's ironic that jogged my memory about this conversation about trying? You remember how people covering the team wanted to give Drury credit for trying to get Mike Sullivan and Rod Brindamore 4 years ago, even though they were employed by other teams? It's no wonder he values trying so much, because it seems like that's the only thing he can do is try instead of getting what he actually wants. It's one thing to say, well, we got to get better defensively. I'm going to try. And that's kind of that is a reflection on what I keep coming back to, a lack of accountability. The idea that a general manager deserves credit for saying, that guy's a good coach for another team, I want him, is laughable. That is what a 7-year-old says about football. That's why they put all of their good players on one team when they play Madden, so they can feel like they're good at the game, because it doesn't take a lot to say, wow, Justin Jefferson's so good, I'm putting him on my team. It doesn't take a lot to say, well, Mike Sullivan's a good coach, I want him. Okay, great. You didn't get him. You don't get credit for that. That is not how people who are serious talk about their goals and their expectations. And for too much of the last few seasons, it's been, well, they're trying. He tried to get Jake Gensel, and we ended up with Jack Roslovic and Alex Wenberg. And he tried to make the team better, and he added Tarasenko and Patrick Kane. And he tried to give them a shot in the arm, and it was Frank Vetrano and Andrew Kopp. It's so much about the attempt. And look, is there something to be said for trying and failing and learning? Yes. But at a certain point, you have proven that you don't deserve to keep getting chances. And that's what's so frustrating about all of this, is they are really locked into a corner right now. And as much as we keep saying, yeah, just get rid of Zibanejad, just get rid of Kreider, they do have no trade protections they have to account for. They do have to actually convince these guys that, hey, getting rid of you is a good thing for you. And I don't know what the landing spots will be. I don't think there's an obvious one for either guy. I think the Rangers have a lot of work to do. It starts with a head coach. But again, It doesn't matter who the head coach is if Trocheck's not going to play defense, if Zibanejad's going to continue to be mediocre, if Kreider can't play at the net front anymore. You saw it for 82 games that the Rangers did not have answers.
No, they don't. And I don't see a way, given the current structure of this team and the current contract situation of a lot of these guys on the team, how it will dramatically get better with a different head coach. And it will, by proxy of, oh my God, this was the worst season I've ever seen in my life. Surely this can't possibly get worse. So, by default, it will get better. But the same, the people that created the problems are still here. Chris Drury put the team together, which caused the problems. The players on the ice have not helped the problem get any better. They have been one of the, stats all point to it. The eye test all points. So whatever method you want to use, you can use an abacus if you want, like whatever method of figuring out who's good and who's bad that you want to use to figure that out. Like, these guys did not help the problem. They were actively bad. So, a head coach is a new head coach is needed. It was necessary given how disastrous the season was and how all of the infighting kind of came to a head towards the end of the season. But whether that be Mike Sullivan, I don't have two things that rhyme with Sullivan, Lakers, and 5. Like, I just don't see how things can, like, you can magically fix all of the issues. Like, there's a fire going on and you pour a bucket of water on it. It's like, yeah, that doesn't make it, like, you're trying, but like, so the building's getting burnt, dog. Like, I don't know if you know this, but you're going to need more than a bucket of water to fix this.
Positive regression will not solve all of their problems, and it's very important we all say that over and over again, because if they think positive regression is going to solve all of their problems, we will be having this exact same conversation next summer. But then it'll be James Dolan picking another GM, and we'll be starting this entire process from scratch again, which is why this seems
with a head coach that wasn't picked by the new general manager.
Yes, so you're going to reset the clock again and waste another year of Shesterkin and Fox's primes. But that'll do it for this week's edition of Liberty Blue. If they should hire a coach before next Monday, we will do our best to have an episode for you by then. If not, we will talk to you guys next week.
Later.